Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance in the Crawlspace studios in Wormtown. Lance, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing well. Feels good to be here in the comfy confines of the Crawlspace studio. It's a bit drizzly outside, so it's nice to be sitting across from you. How are you today?
I'm doing well, but we got to leave early because we don't want to get impacted by the worm.
Right. We know that he does come out when it's raining, and it's that perfect type of rain for the worm right now. It's that misty in between a drizzle and a downpour. That's the perfect conditions for the worm.
And the conditions for this interview, Lance, were perfect as well. We spoke with Celene Beth Calderon of the docu-series Theodore, which is about sort of Ted Bundy adjacent, if you will.
Yeah, Celene does a really good job intentionally staying away from how Ted Bundy is typically categorized as a charming individual, a handsome man, someone who could talk to you 1 second and be, your best friend, and then you learn of all these horrible atrocities that he committed. But having that moniker of that charming, everyday American guy, she does a successful job staying away from that, and she focuses on the victims and people who are associated and related to the victims, and it's incredibly effective. I think it's a 6-part series, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think she's still editing it, and she had a screening in Toronto, I think this past summer, and she was going to do a screening at the American Crime Festival, which of course is not happening, and she was going to be there. So that's one of the reasons we got connected with her. So at least we can be grateful for the Crime Festival that didn't happen, to be connected to some wonderful people like Celene.
But good things came from this, and we did talk to her, and we did organize this interview, and she turned out to be a super cool person. Not like we had any doubt that she wasn't a super cool person, but she was incredibly gracious with her time and very passionate about what she's doing. First-time filmmaker out of the gate took on this daunting task, which is impressive.
It's pretty incredible. So check out Theodore's social pages. You can find the links in the show notes. You can't really find the documentary anywhere yet, but I will say this is still a fascinating conversation with a really talented filmmaker, someone who has delved very deep into Ted Bundy and the victims and spoke to a lot of people whose lives were impacted by that son of a bitch, Bundy.
Oh, now you're just insulting his mom.
Good point. He's a bastard.
Well, now you're just insulting his mom.
Good point. I dislike him.
There you go.
Okay, so give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast listening app, and thanks a lot for listening. Welcome to Crawlspace, Celene Beth Calderon. How are you tonight, Celene?
I'm good. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's really cool to get the opportunity to speak with you, and we'll get into your documentary, Theodore, which is amazing.
Thank you.
Your docu-series, I should say. But we just want to thank you for joining us, even though what brought us together isn't actually happening, which is
right.
which is the Crime Fest. So
Right.
we want to say thank you for making the attempt to be a part of that. We appreciate it.
Of course.
Yeah. And apologies on it being canceled. That's a real bummer. So but we're happy to talk to you, and that's it helps move forward the whole purpose of it anyway. Just talking and recording
Right.
about your documentary, and so thank you for being here. Now we share some mutual friends, don't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A nice load of them, actually.
Yeah.
See, that's where Tim's wrong, because I don't consider I don't consider myself to have any friends. So just mutual faces in the crowd for the most part.
Yeah, Lance is a real loner, a rebel.
Oh, no.
No, it's cool. Yeah, self-ascribed.
Right.
So who are our mutual friends? We have Dr. Lee Meller. We have Cloyd Steiger, and am I missing anyone?
We've got Sarah Kalin. We've got Emily Nestor. Yeah. So it's like small little true crime community. I mean, it just keeps evolving. I've started speaking with Mike Morford or Morph.
Oh, that scoundrel.
Oh, that son of a bitch.
Yeah, so I've been chatting with him a little bit, but I mean, that's just what I love about this community. It's like, here's one person, you should chat with this person. And we're all kind of experts in our own way with different, cases or our experiences, professions. I love it. It's a great little community.
Yeah, and the support within this tiny true crime community is really incredible, and you feel it, especially when you focus on the victims, like what you've done with Theodore, because that is such an admirable quality. Because I think a lot of times there is some element of sensationalism that people assume has to be there, but what you've done with Theodore is not that.
Right. Thank you. Yeah.
Can you explain to us what Theodore is?
Absolutely.
Is that what makes Theodore stand apart from the other documentaries that are out there? Because there's so many that you can
So many.
access, whether it's on YouTube or
Yeah.
Netflix or Amazon. What makes Theodore stand out?
So Theodore, first and foremost, is a 6-episode series. So we are coming out with the most content in terms of episodes. So that already makes us stick out. With that being said, Theodore is really about these individuals' stories while being connected to Ted Bundy. Now, where people get a little bit confused, because there are some overlap with some of my subjects in this documentary that we're seeing in the Netflix documentary, as well as some of HLN's, Oxygen, every network you can think of has created a Ted Bundy documentary in the past year. I started this documentary, which was supposed to be just one linear documentary, and then all of a sudden it just blew up, and we realized we needed episodes to make that happen. But so I started this January of 2017, and I currently reside in Salt Lake City, Utah. So I had home advantage in that regard. And I initially went out to our media here in Salt Lake and Park City, and I just said, hey, I'm looking to start a documentary about Ted Bundy. Can I come, on air? Can I come on TV? Can I, do newspaper interviews? And basically just blasted it out to everybody. Just, if you know somebody that has a Ted Bundy story, someone that knew him, I mean, I tried to get anything that, anyone who would talk to me. I was just an open door. And oddly enough, I started getting emails, and while some were really crazy and outrageous stories, all of a sudden I started receiving emails from people that I've never talked before. And as soon as we started going down that route and meeting with people, I started realizing that there is so much more to this Ted Bundy story that never gets asked. We watch a lot of these documentaries and we see the same regurgitated information over and over and over and over and over again. And we forget what's really at the forefront of the story, and that's the victims and the survivors. And every single person that we interviewed shared that same thought process. We've watched, we've read, we've seen all of this information about Bundy, but that's the one thing that gets left out. And I felt it was my duty to finally change the narrative for this. Being the first female to come out with a documentary about Ted Bundy, I realized I had to give the story a different identity, I guess you could say. So, again, it all started in Salt Lake. We traveled to Seattle a few months later. And then all of a sudden, we started getting support from podcasters, specifically My Favorite Murder. And as soon as that happened, all of a sudden, the word was really getting out now. And that eventually took us to Colorado, to Florida, to Idaho. We went to all the major states that he killed in, and met with so many different people. But again, like I said, Theodore, we're really focusing on the victims, the survivors, and what I like to say are the true victims, as well as law enforcers, legal teams. People don't realize the trauma and PTSD that they take on after such a horrific case like Bundy's, and so we get to display these stories the way that they finally have wanted to share that, rather than saying, okay, walk me through the time that Ted Bundy walked into the Florida State campus at Chi Omega in 1978. Walk me through, just the bare basics and yada, yada,
Yeah,
yada.
but Celene, didn't you hear that he represented himself in trial?
Yeah, didn't you hear that the judge was enamored by him?
Exactly. Like, I'm sick of that. Am I allowed to swear?
Yes.
Okay. I just realized that because I almost stopped myself. But that's what I'm saying. Like I'm so sick of those stories. And when I'm sitting in front of these individuals and asking them the questions, they're looking at me in a way that symbolizes the true pain and suffering that they witnessed. One of our last shoots actually was at the end of July, and we went to a memorial for one of the child victims. And listening to her father speak, as well as the siblings, people don't realize this is still very much a painful subject. And I can only imagine, how these families and these survivors have felt in the past year, seeing all this other Ted Bundy, I don't even know what to call it. I mean, just media galore. And his face was in Times Square. Just that blew my mind, and that pissed me off so bad, because I thought to myself, what is a family member thinking or feeling opening, whether it be the internet or newspaper, and seeing that picture of Times Square with your fucking daughter's murderer? His face is plastered everywhere like he's Kim Kardashian. I mean, it just
making him like the next great anti-hero that
Absolutely.
you can't help but love him.
Right.
Was that an advertisement for the Netflix show?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So ultimately, a lot of people are very curious about Theodore. They want to know, what separates us. But even from, like I said, just the small nuggets that we have put out there on our social media, people are already like, wait, did someone just call him a piece of shit? Which was Cloyd. And
Yeah.
and people already
Uncle
were like,
Clyde.
wait, go back. And I got to experience already what a crowd is thinking or feeling. We did a special little sneak peek like we were going to do at the festival. And we did it in Toronto back in June, and being able to sit in that audience and hear the audience cheer and cry and clap and feel all the things that I have felt through this process over the past 3 years, it really solidified that we have something special and we're bringing a new take to this story. And I cannot wait for people to see it.
Yeah, that's excellent. And you just went through everything so thoroughly. I was looking at the list of questions that I had.
Oh,
and
no.
I was just like checking them out. No, it's really awesome, because I tend to ask like a 9-minute question, and then I just in a really roundabout way. So
Right.
I'm sure you just saved the audience a lot of eye rolling and hitting fast forward 30 seconds.
So can you tell us about the screening in Toronto? How did that go?
Yeah, it was really cool. So the Toronto True Crime Film Festival, it was their second year. They started following our Theodore page. Honestly, like, they were probably one of the first 100 people to follow us back in 2017, and constantly checking in with me. Is it ready yet? Is it ready yet? Is it ready yet? And Lisa Gallagher is the festival director, and Lisa really felt strongly about the project because, again, we were then tipped off about the Zac Efron piece that was coming out. And so she really wanted to hit on, the victim side of things. So we finally got the approval to at least do the sneak peek and just about a 20-minute screening, as well as a Q&A afterwards. And after that, like I said, just sitting in the audience, being able to hear the reactions. We had some podcasters in the audience as well, including Esther Ludlow from Once Upon a Crime. And so it was really cool, again, to just have more true crime individuals there with us watching it. But I think the biggest thing that people walked away from, at least when they came up and shared their thoughts with me, was just that they are so happy to finally see the truth come out. And I think people in the true crime community, or even our audience members, they can get the same stories over and over and over again. But when it's something new and it's something that maybe makes them think a little bit more, that's going to resonate more with them.
Yeah, but Celene, didn't you hear that he escaped from prison twice?
I know. It's like that part is so important. And what's funny that you mentioned that we actually went to the courthouse where he jumped out the window, and we actually do a pan showing how far that jump is. So we will still have little bullshit moments like that. But we're really trying to, the story that goes with that moment as we're showing it is still from the perspective of his psychologist that from Utah that Ted called after he did his first escape. So again, we really try to incorporate everyone's stories as we're going through this process of showing where he was. And that's the other thing that I noticed with a lot with these documentaries, that they didn't go to the locations. They usually either flew people out, or they flew people, to a separate location, or I don't know. But I really enjoyed getting intimate, getting to know these people, whether it be in their homes or taking us somewhere. I mean, we went out to lunch with some of these people. We went out drinking with Kathy Kleiner on Halloween night, in the French Quarters in New Orleans.
Nice.
These people, and that's the question I get asked the most. What is your relationship like now that you filmed? And I do consider them very much like a second family. We're all family at this point. And, even if I just get a quick text message from one of them or an email, it means to me that we created something together, and they're hopefully going to be proud of what, we put together and how their stories are going to be told on camera. So I think back to the original question, I think, the Toronto screening, people definitely got to experience that in itself. And they only got, 20 minutes versus 5 hours and 40 minutes lacking. So there's a lot more coming. So, yeah.
Right. So I actually had a question about that. You at one point saw all of the footage that you're, gathering, and you're trying to debate whether or not you should leave any on the cutting room floor. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you left out that you wish you didn't leave out now that it's been expanded into these episodes, or is everything that's there exactly how you want it to be?
That's a great question, because I literally just told my team last week I want to change episodes 1 through 3. So that's funny you bring that up. So no, I'm not content just yet. I think, going backwards from the creator side, my co-creator, Timothy John, who is a brilliant individual, but he's been my right-hand man this whole time. But, when we started going through the episodes and breaking down what we want, we did one cut, and it was right in January when the Ted Bundy tapes came out on Netflix, and we watched episode 1 of that. And I went back to ours and I said, okay, I don't know how, but ours looks just like it. Like, we need to change this drastically right now.
Oh no.
So really what I'm excited to show, at least for that first episode, we get a lot of stories from Marilyn Chino, who was the best friend of Elizabeth Klopfer, who was dating Ted Bundy at the time in Seattle. And and you get to hear her story, her perspective of their relationship, as well as her friendship with Ted, as well as with Liz. And you hear stories that will confuse you, meaning I heard stories about him that all of a sudden I would sit there and be like, wait, but he sounded like a legitimate caring friend, but then the next moment she tells me a different story. I'm like, oh no, there's the manipulator piece of shit again, right here.
Oh, so she would be telling stories that would make him just seem like an average person, which would sort of play with, that perception that you have of him, or that everybody has of him.
Correct. That he's kind and charismatic and charming and debonair. However, she brings you right back to reality, like the next story. And then you're like, forget it. Yeah, no, that's gone. And giving you all these almost, I would hate to say it, but Easter eggs throughout her storytelling, because you realize there's an escalation all of a sudden happening in the background. While they may be eating burgers and drinking milkshakes, he just came back from murdering Janice Ott and Denise Naslin at Lake Sammamish. Those parallel stories, it's chilling. I mean, I remember looking at her and thinking to myself, like, this cannot be a real story right now. That they went out and had burgers after he murdered 2 women. It just
worked up an appetite.
Right. And she said that he was acting off. He usually couldn't maintain eye contact, but even at that time, he was even more jittery. He took a while to respond to questions, always, a couple beats behind because he's thinking of what his next answer is going to be. I mean, those are the stories that I want to hear. But then you go from that, fast forward to his execution, and she talks about the confliction that she had, because she said to me one time on the phone, she said, Celene, I want you to think about one of your absolute best male friends. What if you woke up the next day and you found out he was a mass murderer? What would you do? What would you feel? Would you mourn this person if they died? And she's absolutely right. I don't know what I would do.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Right. So I think, again, her perspective is so important, because I think now, again, today, where we're experiencing a lot more murderers in a different setting, that's something that, we often forget or consider, that murderer may have had family and friends and a community. How are they handling that? That's not something that you just wake up and brush off the next day. Just, all right, he was a piece of shit, moving on. So Mary Lynn is someone that I am so excited to share more of her story, because she has gone on and done a few more documentaries. But we were talking the other day and I said, Mary Lynn, the one thing I've noticed in those other documentaries, you're only on camera for 2 to 5 minutes. And she was like, you know what? You're right. And I said, so you're going to get your justice in Theodore.
Nice.
And we met with her a couple times. And she also gave us that photo of Ted by his bug leaving for Utah that everyone has now seen. At least I think they've seen. She was the one who gave us that photo first. So we were the ones who leaked it initially, but I went to her house by myself before my producer got there, and she handed me that photo the first time I ever met her. And it was like a punch in the gut to be like, wow, this looks like a wholesome individual. And lo and behold, he's one of the biggest devils. So, yeah.
So what was her attitude like? Did she say how long it took her to, I guess, function the way she did before all of that went down with Ted Bundy? Because I'm assuming that it took a toll on her, and I'm assuming it still takes a toll on her.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting because, like I said, she kind of goes back and forth. When she's talking about endearing stories or moments with him, she's genuinely in that moment, and she seems happy and she's laughing and she's it's so interesting because again, you're sitting there and you know who she's talking about, but at the same time, it's like these were happy moments. They were in their 20s, so they're having a grand old time. Now, but when she starts getting to the meat and bones of everything and when they became suspicious, I mean, that's the other thing that people don't realize. Mary Lynn also worked with some of the detectives as well in providing information. And eventually she became very scared of him. And even in those moments when we're all hanging out, and when he would come back to Seattle from Utah to visit, she was very on guard and very much, trying to create that distance between them already. And, I don't want to give too much away, but she talks about his escapes from, Colorado.
Yeah.
And she was fearful. She genuinely was fearful. She had a brother who was a police officer, and she kept calling him and just saying, "What do I do? What if he shows up? What if he kills me? What if you?" I can't imagine the paranoia that you would have because she felt like he already knew that she was talking with law enforcement. So now she's fearful of her life as well as Liz's life. And
That's incredible.
yeah, so she goes into great detail about that as well as, her concern for Liz and Liz's life. I mean, it's so nuanced, and I
Yeah.
really try to break it down, but her story is so crucial and so important.
She was working with the police after his first arrest.
So basically how it breaks down, so after the Lake Sammamish murders, when the composite came out, and her and Liz are kind of mulling over if that's Ted, that's kind of when it starts. Now Liz starts participating, she calls the police and says, "Hey, I think, this kind of resembles my boyfriend." But Mary Lynn was coaching her to do that. Now, when Mary Lynn got involved, it was when here in Salt Lake, because Mary Lynn is originally from Ogden, Utah. So she came down here in 1974 in the fall time, and everything had stopped in Seattle. The women, nobody was going missing anymore. She came down here. She sees the news. She goes back to Seattle and tells Liz, "Hey, what's happening, what was happening in Seattle is happening down in Salt Lake. I think there's something to it." So it kind of goes through this whole story, and I won't get into full detail there. But basically, Liz starts encouraging her church bishop as well as her father to reach out to the Salt Lake police. And then eventually, Jerry Thompson, the head Utah detective of Bundy's case, went to Seattle and started interviewing Liz and Mary Lynn. So after that, that's when Mary Lynn became heavily involved. And again, that's when they, try to backtrack and remember things. So she doesn't get that notoriety either that she was a part of that.
Good God. That is incredible.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back to the days before Facebook and social media. This is in the 70s. So they're operating just on what they're seeing on the news and hearing on the radio. And they see, I mean, you actually had to go out and and search for a composite sketch.
Right.
Maybe they saw it on the news and then they found it in the newspaper. Now you can Google it and you can see it for anybody who might be a suspect of anything. And it's just incredible that all of that effort, and then you have to also have that realization that this person, or you think this person. You start thinking about the behavior that this person has exhibited, and then it all fits, and it's your friend's boyfriend.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's incredible.
It's batshit. Yeah. And I always describe them.
Yeah.
I describe them as Three's Company. Like, that's really what it reminds me of. Like,
oh, don't you dare besmirch the fine name of John Ritter.
I know, R.I.P. But that's
assuming that he was the John Ritter, Ted Bundy reference.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm just really excited for people to really know her story, and again, give her the recognition that she does deserve, because I think she really does, and she had to put on a brave face more than once.
How old was she then?
Oh, let me think. I want to say probably mid to late 20s. I could be wrong.
Jeez.
Yeah, I
Good
can't
for
imagine
her.
the confusion.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And then she eventually, really started to get heavily invested in his confessions towards the end of his life. And, she speaks to that and talks about how cruel it was and how upsetting it was that, he was withholding this information and even down to asking Liz, well, can you ask him, where these women's bodies are? And I mean, it's just like I said, she goes into great detail about all of this, but I really want people to see and understand, to take a moment and think about that question that she asked me. Because again, I don't know what anybody would do, but she laughs it off. She really she told me that she did hold it in for many years that she knew him. We were technically the first people to ever interview her, because she refused. First time I spoke to her, she was like, I'm not going to appear on camera. I'm not going to let you use my voice. I'm not going to let you do anything. You can just talk to me. And I thought, well, this is great. But it took several tries and several meetings and a lot of smiles. And she eventually caved and said, okay, let's just do it. But she's probably like my best friend out of everyone in this series. She calls me at least once a month and we check in with each other, and she's a hoot. I mean, people are going to really love her. So I'm excited.
Well, it's also incredible that this type of woman would feel that way about Ted Bundy, in the sense of how afraid she was when she was working with law enforcement, that she was now afraid for her life.
Yeah.
It just shows the influence that he would have over everybody. I don't think
Yeah.
I think that gets kind of glossed over as well. I think people just write that off as like his charm,
Right.
but I feel like there was something deeper there. I mean, this is a woman who there's no way that Ted Bundy, after he escaped, is checking in on law enforcement's communication with his victims and his girlfriend's friends and that, he's not like tapping things, he's not looking into emails, but she
Exactly.
still had that she still had that feeling.
Right.
It's not charm.
No.
That's not charm, and it's destructive.
Exactly. Yep.
Ugh. What other person that you interviewed here stands out to you? Any law enforcement or any doctors or anything?
Another one of my favorites that people haven't heard from. His name is Jim Sewell, and he was a young officer with Florida State University, and we actually got that connection through my executive producer's father, who is actually, well, he's now a retired judge down in that area. And so anyhow, we had no real knowledge or his background or anything with this interview. So it really was kind of this winging moment of like, I don't know what I'm going to ask. Well, this probably is going to turn out to be a shit show. Turned out to be probably top 3 best interviews that we did. And Jim was, I want to say, I think he was 26 or 27 at the time, still fairly new in the force. He oversaw a lot of rape cases on the FSU campus. And this particular night, January 15th, and he was on a little date at the library, and he made a comment stating, man, like, this town is just so boring. Like, nothing ever happens. I haven't had any real cases. Kind of goes off. And less than, I think, 2 hours later, he gets the call to
Oh my God.
go to Chi Omega. And this
Oh my God.
was his first murder crime scene. He described it as, I mean, just a bloodbath. He said like a shark attack. and he was in charge of calling the parents.
Oh no.
What? Really? This poor guy is on a date at the library?
He goes home after the date. Yeah, 2 hours later, he gets woken up to this phone call to go and report.
And then
to
he's going
Diana.
to he has to inform the parents.
Correct.
Good God.
So he talks about one of the phone calls to one of the parents of the deceased, and he says that he can still close his eyes and hear that mother's scream. And that's something he's never going to get out of his head.
Jesus.
Oh, sorry, that makes me really emotional. He goes into great detail too, again, kind of what I was touching on about PTSD and really what happens to officers after they leave the force, and they have certain cases that, stick with them, and this is one of them. But he goes through and he talks about, the full process of, seeing Kathy and, all the women in the house, and spoiler alert, he actually got to attend Bundy's execution. And
no way.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So he walks us through execution day, as well as, where he stood at the time of the death penalty to where he is now. Such an interesting individual, and just has a lot of important messages to share. But he's someone that I just absolutely admire, and again, shared stories that I don't think people really understand or realize. Again, when you come onto a crime scene, I mean, again, it's the stories that we like to hear as an audience member. But again, let's stop, let's break this down, let's go through every little minute detail and get an idea of what that's like. And that's exactly what he did. And the one thing I do want to preface is that I was very adamant with every single one of my subjects that they were not to speak of how Bundy murdered, of any crime scenes or anything like that, if they were not present. Solely because I don't want this, again, regurgitated, just hyperbole, information. Like, I don't want it. So I allowed him, Mr. Ken Katsaris, who was the sheriff at the time, and Kathy Kleiner are the only ones that I allowed to speak of, the scene and what happened. And I rightfully told them, this is their story. They're allowed to speak of what they remember.
Yeah. I have a question about the attending the execution. Is that something that he volunteered to do? Did he request to be there to see it? Or was he assigned to be there?
If my memory serves me right, and nobody quote me on this, I have to go back and check my notes. I want to say, if I remember correctly, they reached out to a lot of the law enforcers in Lake City, as well as Tallahassee, and prosecutors. And I mean, I believe they invited those people. So some people said yes and some people said no. Like Ken Katsaris was invited, he declined. So I believe Jim was offered that position to go. And then the other individual was Bob Deacle, who was adamant that he wanted to be there. He was the prosecutor in the Kimberly Leach case in Lake City, and he was also in attendance, but he felt like he needed to see the job done. And that was his moment of ensuring that the case was closed, was seeing Bundy take up.
Yeah, was that Jim's feelings as well, that he had been there from the beginning and he wanted to see it right to the end?
I honestly don't remember. I'm trying to think back to that.
I'm sure the I'm sure that moment's not lost on him.
No.
I'm sure once the execution date is set, he's probably thinking to himself, like, I was there.
Yeah.
In the beginning.
Exactly.
And it would seem wrong to not be there at the end.
Right. And I think if I remember correctly, the only thing that I kind of remember significantly, and again, this was almost exactly a year ago that we did that interview, and it's one of the hardest ones for me to watch, but I know he mentioned that he went and got some scotch right afterwards. I think a steak and scotch.
Oh, yeah.
So that was the one part I do remember. But so I would say him. And then lastly, I mean, it's kind of a toss up between Kathy Kleiner as well as an individual by the name of Bruce Lubeck. Kathy Kleiner was a survivor at the Chi Omega house. And I don't want to speak too much to her story because, again, she's been in a lot of the other documentaries, but she shared a lot more in ours. I don't know if I think she mentioned she tried to tell the same stories in the other ones, but they didn't show it. But our interview was the first interview. She said that she ultimately got emotional because she said she could feel the connection between a woman and a woman. And that ultimately made her feel more vulnerable and more comfortable to speak open. But the one part that I do want to stress on her story that I think very much encompasses today, Kathy was barely hanging by a thread of her life. And when she got to the hospital, they were concerned that she was sexually assaulted as well. And she heard them say a rape kit. And Kathy said out of all the events that transpired that night, that was the one thing that was the most upsetting to her, was to hear of that. And she was raised in a Hispanic family. They take, your celibacy very seriously. And that was the most upsetting part to her. So again, kind of tying in today's conversations around sexual misconduct, I think that really speaks volumes that someone who almost lost their life really was only concerned about that. So Kathy will go into detail about that, also go into detail from the moment that she went back to, her bedroom to obtain her items, then going back down to Miami where she grew up, and what transpired afterwards. And that she was not allowed to speak to her sorority sisters anymore. Nobody kept in contact with her. And she never knew why until a different funeral. So she'll go into detail about that. But Kathy is someone that has been hit with so many trials and tribulations and is such an important character. And I say character because when I met her, she really was just a character in a book to me, almost. And then to meet her face to face for the first time was like, this is a real, living, beautiful human being.
My gosh.
So
you dove so deep into this. Where did you come from? What is your background?
I just wrote down, this is your first documentary?
Yeah. Correct.
At least you dipped your toe in the whole thing and you didn't take on a really substantial, heavy project.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, no.
For the first one out.
Right. Yeah, no, my background's I come from a family, my siblings are in the industry out in Los Angeles, but they're not in documentaries. One's in TV, the other one is in feature films. And I studied communications, specifically public speaking, in college, and really always documentaries have always been something that has resonated with me, even as a kid, watching like Unsolved Mysteries, Rescue 911. I loved just watching real stories. And that just carried along. But I grew up in Park City, Utah, so home of the Sundance Film Festival. And
yes.
And so back in 2015, I went back to get a second bachelor's in film, and I took a Sundance class at the University of Utah. And after that semester, I realized, you know what, fuck it. I'm just going to try to do this on my own. So I started volunteering at the Sundance Film Festival, and by the graces of God, honestly, I was put in the documentary film program, and I don't know how.
Oh, wow.
To this day, I still don't know how.
That's huge.
So I volunteered from 2016 up until this current festival, and they were kind of the ones that were like, you know what, you have a concept, run with it, just do it. So Theodore was actually born at Sundance in 2017. And yeah, and I had no idea what the hell I was doing. And you know what? I still don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah, but at least you have like a huge budget behind this project.
Oh yeah, just money flowing, just it's crazy, Times Square.
Well,
No.
I think what you said earlier about, I just said fuck it and I did it. Like that's sort of what they teach you anyway.
Correct.
Is like you said you're told you got this project, it's a passion, you just need to go do it. That's just a politer way of saying that.
Correct. Right.
It's a good lesson. Yeah, no one's gonna wait.
Yeah.
No one's gonna do it for you. You just got to do stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. And like I said, it was just running around my state being like, will somebody give me a microphone? And trust me, and people were like, who's this crazy lady? Yeah, nobody's going to want to talk about Ted Bundy.
Yeah, you're like, I have a degree in public speaking. Give me a microphone.
Exactly. So,
I thought that was the degree. It came with the degree.
That's what it was. Right. Exactly.
So, but pardon the Ted Bundy question here. Now, there's been some conjecture about if he has a daughter or not. I have a strong opinion on this. I'm curious if you have any insight or what your opinion is on this.
Mm-hmm. He does.
He does.
He does. And this is probably like top 3 questions that I get asked all the time from just random people. Is she in your documentary? No. And I wouldn't invite it, to be honest. Well,
for her sake,
correct. When I think about the cards that she has been dealt with, I'm sure in her life, I can't even imagine how you begin to rationalize that. And then she's another person that I think about often. Again, what is she thinking with all of these documentaries coming out, with the Zac Efron one? That's how she gets to know her dad, is through that. Now, I talked a little bit about this on Lee's podcast, Murder Was the Case. So if anyone wants to go and reference that, I was given a ton, and when I say a ton, I mean a ton of Bundy's personal belongings. And I got to read through a lot of letters and papers and his joke book and poems and blah, 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 blah. But
sorry, did you just say his joke book?
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, he's like a comedian.
He tried to throw some zingers together. They fell pretty flat. I'll say that.
Yeah.
But through his letters going in and out of Stark prison, there were some little nuggets in there that I believe I was able to figure out who his daughter was. And yeah, and kind of that life after, his death. But yeah, I mean, and I know a lot more daughters of murderers have come out and, spoken to it, like Keith Jesperson's daughter, Melissa Moore, I think is her name, who did the Happy Face podcast, which is a phenomenal podcast. But I mean, even listening to that, I just had a pit in my stomach because I just kept thinking, I wonder if this is how she feels, Bundy's daughter. I mean, just, do I have those traits? Am I going to end up a murderer one day? Just, what is my brain like? How is it wired? I mean, I don't know, but that's, and if she ever wanted to speak or reach out to me just privately, I would welcome that wholeheartedly. But again, I don't know what advantage that would give anybody, other than just her looking like an animal in a cage and everyone gawking.
Yeah. And also, I mean, it's basically satisfying people's curiosity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Right. So you're right. Yeah. There's not too much actual purpose to it.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
It's fascinating, though. I'm really interested in that. Wow. Do you have any insight on how that happened? Is the folk legend, I suppose, true that that the mother of his kid was impregnated while he was in jail?
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
He paid off
That's
guards. Yeah. No, that's all
the
true.
part I just have a hard time believing. Like a guard.
Yeah, you've been adamantly against that.
Oh my God! How a guard is gonna let a convicted killer just?
Dude, he's charming.
You would be
Oh my
surprised.
God!
And that's
You're kidding me. I'm disgusted.
No, and that's the one thing that weirded me out through this whole process is that the people that actually did know him or spent adequate time with him, they all said the exact same thing to me. And they said, you know what? If you sat down with him, I guarantee you would just love him. You would adore him. Like he would talk to politics with you. Like you would just think he's so funny. He would adore you. Like talking to me like this is a long lost uncle. You know what I mean? Like, oh, if you knew him. Like, and I just kept sitting there thinking to myself, like, this is asinine. Like, I don't understand. But I did speak with a guard who we didn't interview him on camera. He was going to, and unfortunately, his home got impacted pretty heavily by Hurricane Michael, which occurred when we went to Tallahassee last year. But he mentioned that him and Ted would play cards. They would pull pranks on his wife. They would prank call her from the prison. And I mean, he literally.
Oh, hold on. Sorry. What's more of a prank call when Ted Bundy's calling your wife?
Correct. So
Like, what more do you have to do? Say it's not Ted Bundy?
Exactly.
Like, it's Ted Bundy calling her. Like,
right.
What's the prank?
Like, that's just fucking scary. Yeah, I know. And he had a great laugh about it. He's like, I know it was not very nice, but. So it's just, I mean, I'm telling you, he could get away with it. Like, if you watch Mindhunter and the whole Ed Kemper scenario between, him and Holden, like that's sincerely how I feel Ted was. Like, people just enjoyed being around him. He could bullshit really, really well. And he could remember personal things about everybody that he meets. So you walk into a room and he's going to ask you about your family. How's skiing? How's church? How's so-and-so? Of course, like, you're going to be manipulated by this asshole. And yeah, no. He definitely.
Wow. Sounds like a fine line between a perfect psychopath and a politician.
Correct. Which he was trying to be both. Well, he was both.
Yeah, he really was.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
I want to pivot real quick because
Sure.
I want to make sure I get this in. You're a member of Women in Film.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yep, for the LA chapter. I haven't done much with it because I'm not currently residing in LA, but I'm in LA often because that's actually where I'm originally from. But my next upcoming project was actually I was contacted by Sarah Kalin. So I was anticipating going through the Women in Film to get my next project or to get some ideas, and a different one fell into my lap. So, but I'm hoping to do a little bit more with them, as well as I'm a Latina. And so I'm actually working right now to get into like a specific group for Latinx filmmakers as well. So I'm looking to expand out more on that.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I only bring that up because the subject matter of Theodore is focusing on the victims, and I just think it's admirable that you take that cause and you try to apply it in your profession.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we at the Toronto Film Festival, they actually gave a percentage of the ticket sales to their rape crisis center based in Toronto. And then when we did our Indiegogo, we actually also donated on behalf of the victims and survivors to RAIN as well. So when it comes out, I equally would still like to have something like that to ensure that, money that comes in is still being put out for those resources for all victims. And that's something that's very important to me when it comes to this stuff, to ensure that we're helping others along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. And where can people see this if it's available anywhere?
TBD.
Right now? Or?
TBD. The actual series, or like where they can find us on social media?
Well, yeah, the series, because I'm sure you're going to get at least 300,000 emails after people hear this episode, and they're going to say, I'm looking for it. I don't know where to find it.
Yeah. So the best way to keep up with all of our formal updates is to follow us on social media. So we are hoping to have that answer by the end of the year. And so as soon as we have it, best believe we'll be blasting that out. But people can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, as well as Tumblr, even though I don't know what I'm doing on Tumblr. But just look up either Theodore the documentary or Theodore the docu-series on any of those platforms, and you will find us.